Pele leaned in and said something to Freddie.
Don't let them change you. Keep working on what makes you different and what makes you special. It was great advice, but it caused me some problems.
But what could change Freddie Adu?
Soccer is going to explode, and it's going to be around this kid.
We were the Beatles. Everywhere we went, it was the Freddie show.
And with that came the expectation, and with that came the pressure.
New episodes of American Prodigy drop Tuesdays from Blue Wire Podcasts.
What is crack-a-lackin', Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Valley coming at you without my co-host Adam Frommel today, but we do have a loaded podcast for you nevertheless, and that's Caps Lock loaded. We are going to be rolling out our look-aheads for as many teams as we can before the start of the season. It'll probably leak into the regular season, but guests galore. They're coming, and it starts now. We're going to talk to Light Years podcast, Sam Esfandiari, today. Follow him on Twitter, at Sam Esfandiari. That's at Sam, Esfandiari. After him, we are going to have TJ McBride, fellow Blue Wire podcaster. He hosts the Rocky Mountain Hoops podcast. He's going to be coming on to talk about the Denver Nuggets. You can follow him on Twitter at TJ McBride NBA, spelled exactly as it sounds. And then we wrap up with a look at the Oklahoma City Thunder's future. Super interesting team over the offseason. I brought on Olivia Panchal from Daily Thunder. She is a senior writer there. She's also co-host of the Crossbolts podcast over there. Follow her on Twitter at Olivia Panchal. That's Panchal. I won't try to waste any more of your time. Let's get to this. Just a quick reminder, though, to rate, review, and subscribe to Hardwood Knocks wherever you're getting your podcasts. Even if you're not using iTunes, though, head over there, search us, throw us that 5-star rating, throw us a 5-star review. We are committed to continuing rolling out the content and appreciate every single rating and commenter and subscriber who downloads every episode that we get. So without further delay, let's get to talking about first the Warriors, then the Nuggets, and then the Oklahoma City Thunder. Olivia, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the Hardwood Knocks podcast to talk some Oklahoma City Thunder with me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about it.
Look, the Thunder have a lot to talk about. And I don't say this as a joke, but like there were moments where I just forgot who was on their roster because of how much movement there was over the offseason so far for them. And so I think my first question to you has to be is just what is, settling in, looking like zooming out and looking at the whirlwind of transactions and movements that happened. What was your, general impression of the offseason, the overarching sentiment that you take away from it? Maybe something you particularly liked or something you thought was imperfect, just zooming out and kind of giving us an overview of what you thought about what they did.
Yeah, it's literally my job to cover the Thunder, and I still can't keep up with who all is on the Thunder. They have like 20 players on the roster right now, and half of them I've never even heard of before. So it's been a pretty crazy offseason. But I think on the whole, my general opinion is that it was positive. I think that we got a really good return on Schroeder and Adams and pretty good on Paul. I think that Thunder fans have gotten a little bit greedy just because Sam Presti is so good at what he does that we just expect to get, 5 first-round picks for Chris Paul, which really isn't realistic. So if we are being realistic, I think what we got for those players was really good. I was most impressed by the Adams trade. I was really surprised by the return that they got. I thought that they would have a hard time trading Adams just because of the size of his contract and kind of his skill set being limited for the way that the NBA is trending. But we got really great return from the Pelicans, and the Pelicans even signed him to a 2-year extension. So that was really probably the trade that impressed me the most from Sam Presti.
Yeah, that one really surprised me. They didn't have to get a first-round pick and then to not have to take back Eric Bledsoe in that deal. Kind of felt like a stroke of genius for them. And then George Hill is someone that you're not going to get high value for him, but if they wanted to move him again, he's easier to move than Eric Bledsoe, which is why it's big. And just the sheer volume of first-round picks they have now, what is actually most interesting about it to me is so they have a zillion first-round picks between now and 2026, and yet they don't feel like they're overloaded in any one class. They don't have 4 first-round picks in 2022 or 2021. And with the, when they moved Green to Philly and they got the 2025 first round pick, I think it was, that just seems smart, where it's get this distant asset because you're so inundated with all these first round picks at the moment. And I'm wondering if that's maybe why they actually didn't get more for taking on Horford's contract, because I still viewed Green as an asset. And when you look at it as giving up him and only getting one first round pick and Horford back, I think that was the move that made me the most uncomfortable, which is to say it wasn't really that uncomfortable, except when you're looking at it through the lens of, well, now they have this, like, Philly should still be good, but like, what if they're not? Down the line. Like, I think that ends up being a fairly huge deal, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you have to deal all these picks because you're in a roster spot crunch because you have a trillion of them in any given year.
Right, exactly. And I think it's a really smart move. It's very strategic because it opens up so many possibilities. The Thunder are in a really unique position right now where they don't have to commit to one certain pathway, because they have, picks ranging all the way up until 2027. And they can kind of make decisions as they go, depending on what happens this season and next season. If things are going really well, they can maybe leverage some of the future picks to do something now, or they can kind of wait it out and see what the draft classes are going to be like in the future. So I think that we're in a really, really good position, even though we're about to be really, really bad this season.
Is there like an element of why now to this, where I think a lot of people expected the teardown to come immediately after, like the full-on teardown to come after the Westbrook and Paul George trades, or maybe like towards midseason last year? Was it, purely because that Chris Paul's contract was viewed like as a net negative last year, and now you turn around and get actual value for it, so the timing was just right? Do you think it was a matter of they kind of looked at I don't want to say tanking, but like organic badness as being a market inefficiency right now in a Western Conference, where I think, as it stands, OKC is probably the only team that identifies itself behind the scenes as, hey, we're not going to make the playoffs, or we're not necessarily aiming for the play-in tournament. And so there's value in them just being bad now because no one else is trying to be.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think that it was in the back of their minds at the start of last season that this is something that was going to happen either this season or next season. And I think what really changed that was Chris Paul and how much better I think that he was than we expected he would be, and how much value we could get from him, and that spilled over to other people on the team as well. So Dennis Schroeder as well, at the time that we traded him now, had probably the highest trade value that he would ever have. So I think they made a decision midseason to continue to push and to get the maximum return and not head into this tanking season with a lot of large contracts and a lot of money on the books that they won't be able to flip later.
It does seem, and like, other teams in, I won't say similar situation because they've been bad for longer, but if you look at Cleveland, if you look at New York, like, they don't necessarily have that franchise North Star. And it seems that Oklahoma City has decided, like, that's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And so I think there's been talk about that. So going into this season, like, the first 2 years, like, he played with other really good veterans around him. And while he still has some there, like, the supporting cast just might be super transient at this point. So what is it that the team is going to be looking for him from next year? I know there's been a lot of talk about him improving his defense, and, you can speak to this better than I can. Maybe they're just planning on saddling him with like more bigger wing assignments. But I also, as I mentioned to you, like, it does seem, just given their personnel now specifically, and then how poor the offense was last year when he was on the floor without Chris Paul, that they probably need him to develop as a half-court initiator and even off-the-dribble three-point shooter just as much, if not more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the number one priority for SGA going into the season is being the primary ball handler, playing point guard, creating his own shots, doing things on his own now that he doesn't have Schroeder and Chris Paul to facilitate for him. So that's going to be a huge thing for him, and not just creating shots for himself, but facilitating his teammates as well. And that's not something that he has had to do before. And there were instances last season when Chris Paul or Dennis Schroeder would be out and he would play point guard, and it didn't really go as well as we all hoped it would. But, he was kind of like thrown into that position without a lot of preparation, I guess. And so I think with that being the primary goal of the season and him getting a lot of experience doing that, I think he'll be better. I think he's up to the challenge. I do think just like innately as a player, he's a very good shooter. He has very good ball handling skills. I actually think that his defense is pretty good considering his size. And I think that is something that they want him to build on. Now that Chris Paul's not there, now that Schroeder's not there, he's going to have to take on some bigger defensive assignments. I think obviously Lou Dort gets the number one assignment, but Shai's really got to step up and guard, some bigger players as well.
Is there anything that you really liked or were surprised about watching him last year, since it was his first season in Oklahoma City, just relative to his game?
He would just have these moments where he would just have like these otherworldly games where it was kind of like watching him become a superstar in real time. And it wasn't always like that. Like he definitely has some issues, and there was definitely some youngness showing in that game 7 against Houston for SGA. But just like throughout the season, he would have these moments where you could just like, this guy is going to be an all-star. This guy's going to take over the league one day. And I just want more of that. And I feel like this is a really good season for him to do that, just because, it's kind of all the focus is on him. The offense is centered around him. I hope he really takes off and takes on that role full-heartedly, but not too well that we win a lot of games. So all the games by 1 point, that's fine.
I think a lot of people are skeptical on his ability to maybe be like the lead man for an offense, but just, for me, who's choppering in for like only like a game at a time, his first 2 years in the league, like his pick and roll IQ just seems to be the change of pace that he can go with in there and navigate traffic. He cut down on his turnovers in the pick and roll from his rookie to sophomore season. Like that feels like good evidence to be like, hey, maybe this guy can be the engine for an entire offense. The one thing maybe they need to do, and perhaps they have it now, I would probably say no, but that's something to just look forward to, is can you just make sure you're surrounding him with a bunch of shooting, because that opens so much more options for him. But I would think that just looking at that, that it has to be super encouraging, because it feels like he's been in the league longer, maybe because he was like on that Clippers team that made the playoffs, and then he was traded, and now the Thunder are like overturning their identity again. But to have that much improvement from year 1 to year 2, and then again to still just be coming out of year 2, I feel like seems like a fairly big deal.
Yeah, it's a lot to ask from a player that young, but like I said, I think he's up to it. And I think he's known since he came to Oklahoma City that this would be what his role would be in OKC, to be the franchise player, to be our North Star, as you said. So I think he's been preparing for it. He's ready. I'm excited. And
hopefully he stays among the best dressed in the league. So that's always fun that he brings that little flair. One of my favorite things about the Thunder's offseason was like there was this coaching search tumult for like over a month, like between all these different teams in the NBA, and the Thunder were just like kind of off to the shadows, chilling, and then they make a hire that I think, from people who are 5,000 feet removed from the situation just didn't seem coming. So I'm curious. Well, I guess we should start here, because I actually, just before the start of the podcast, how are we are pronouncing it Mark Daigneault, like as the Thunder sent out, or are we going with the French pronunciation?
I think we're sticking with Mark Daigneault. That's how he pronounces it. That's how Presti pronounces it. So I guess we'll go with that. I've just been calling him Mark the Shark because it's easier.
What was your overall impression of that hire? Were you as sort of taken aback by maybe not the line of thinking from the Thunder there, but like their ultimate choice as everybody else?
So I will say I wasn't expecting him specifically, but I was expecting them to hire someone unexpected, if that makes sense, because that's just the way that Sam Presti is. He finds these people, just that no one's thinking about, that are in like the far corners of the world, and he just zeroes in on them, and he picks the person that he thinks will be the best for the franchise, regardless of what the media is saying, what fans think would be the best hire, etc. So I was expecting someone unexpected, but after going to the media availability with Daigneault and kind of talking to the other players about what they thought about him as a coach, I think that he's a really good player development coach. So he coached our G League team for 5 years and then came up to coach as an assistant for the Thunder last season. And so he has a really keen ability to develop young players. And I also think that he has a really good relationship with the players. Almost every single player we've talked to so far at media availability has mentioned that Daigneault really emphasizes personal relationships with the players and getting to know them and having that like kind of one-on-one feel with every single one of the players. And the players seem really receptive to that and very excited about having him as a coach. They, are all really excited for him for getting the call up. And I think on the whole, it's going to be kind of a learning process for both him and the players at the same time. But I think if he takes these big strides while we're rebuilding, he could be a long-term fixture for the Thunder. But it really all just depends on how these next couple seasons go.
I've always kind of thought if that was an underrated aspect of coaching choices where maybe like some sentiments might suggest that you should go with a more experienced coach to lead what's going to wind up being a young group, or is it better to get someone like Daigneault who's 35 and in theory it's easier to relate to, 23, 25-year-olds when you're 35 as opposed to 55-year-old Billy Donovan, and then just lean on veterans in the locker room to take care of the rest. It's something I've thought about before, like not much, but that makes it, if he's so good at relating to players now, that makes it seem like, and then being in the G League definitely had to help with that like aspect of the coaching too. So that like the train of thought here seems to be really spot on for what the Thunder are trying to do.
Exactly. And I don't think that, like a Doc Rivers or a D'Antoni would be the right fit right now for the Thunder with where they are. And I don't think any of those coaches want to coach the Thunder right now, understandably. So I think it was a perfect hire. Sam Presti really believes in him. He's been around the franchise for a long time. So I think he's really just aligns with the direction the Thunder are going.
Doc Rivers' voice sounds like blown out speakers now. Could you imagine him coaching like a really young team for a year and then what it might sound like after that?
Exactly.
Have you, I know, I feel like this is championed about almost every new or definitely young coach, but Daigneault comes from the pace and space mold. Is there anything that you can tell us about, like just from a sense of how you think the Thunder are going to play or what their identity is going to be under him on the floor?
Oh man, that's a difficult question. It's so hard to say just because, first of all, I don't even think this current roster that we have right now will be the roster throughout the entire season. And all these moving pieces going in and out are really going to be a challenge for Daigneault and how he's going to kind of have some semblance of consistency throughout the season. So it's really hard to say. I think just because, well, you could go either way. You could say that because they have younger players, they could kind of play a faster offense, but also they're more inexperienced players, so maybe like a more calculated approach would be better. I honestly don't know. I think it'll really depend on who's on the roster, but I think he'll stick to his pace and space, but we'll see.
Now, as you mentioned, this roster is just invariably going to change, and it could seemingly happen on a whim. Like we can bet it'll happen before I think the trade deadline's at the end of March this year, but it feels like it could just happen at any moment. Looking at this roster long term, though, who's the second most important player behind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? I'm assuming it's Darius Baisley or Aleksej Pokuševski, but I'm honestly I feel like you could probably make an argument for one or two other guys as well.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about the short term, long term, then it's Darius Bazley. He's kind of like he's a ready now player. He took really, really, really big strides and made huge improvements last season, especially in the bubble. And if he can come into this season picking up where he left off, that's going to be phenomenal for the Thunder, and that definitely makes him, the second best player, the second piece for the Thunder. Pokashevsky, I feel like, is more of a long-term project. He's very young. He was the youngest player available in the draft, and I think several people have said this to describe him. He has probably the lowest floor and highest ceiling. He really could go either way, and I think it's going to be more of a long-term project. I think he'll play a little bit in the G League before he really makes an impact for the Thunder.
And so do you think that's where he spends most of his time then this upcoming season?
Yeah, I do. We talked to him yesterday. He's a little sweetheart, but he's just so young. And so, he seems really willing to work and put in the work and the time and willing to learn. But he is just, he's very young. And I think that he's going to have to adjust to the NBA. The biggest thing, obviously, is his size. He knows that. He's working on it. He's putting on weight, but you can't roll him out at center on opening day for sure.
Yeah, and that was the pick in the draft where if you're the Hawks and you're holding on to the Thunder's 2022 first, that's turns into 2 seconds if it doesn't convey. You had to know in that moment that you weren't getting that first round pick because it was the Thunder are planning on going through this rebuild for quite some time if they're taking this 18-year-old kid who I think some people were even questioning whether he was going to come over to the States at all this year.
Right, exactly. So he just has a lot of unknowns. I think in the best case scenario, dare I say, he's an up and coming Kevin Durant just with his size and his frame. But that's obviously the upper ceiling level of him. But I mean, if he can get bigger, maybe he could be more like a Jokic where he can play center, but he can also shoot. So there's just a lot of variability for him as a player. it really could go either way. But I will say that he's someone that the Thunder didn't land on by accident. They moved up in the draft to specifically get Pokashevsky, and that tells me that they see something in him that they specifically want going forward, or they saw an opportunity where they can afford to take the risk because they know that we're not contending this season. So overall, I think, it's fine, but we'll have to see what happens with him.
Yeah, there was criticism where a lot of people thought it was a reach, and I'm not a draft Nick, so like a lot of these guys I'm only looking at after the draft, but two, I don't know that you can make, like, to me, too big of a reach when you're outside the lottery. Like that was pick number 17. At the end of the day, what is pick number 17 supposed to turn into? And it's not like, they drafted someone who wasn't considered an NBA prospect in that spot. So we obviously don't know how it's going to turn out, but I actually like, for teams outside the lottery specifically, and maybe even later on in the lottery, like, I appreciate these types of big swings.
Yeah. And Sam Presti, we all know he's got a pretty great track record in the draft, and he has gambled on young players like this before, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. It worked out really well with Darius Baisley the year before. It didn't work out that well with Terrence Ferguson. So, I think that I have confidence in Presti in his decisions, so I think it'll be good.
So for Darius Baisley specifically, like, what role, like, do you see from him this year, or do you buy into the 3-point shooting he showed in the bubble? I think he was over 46% in those final 8 games that the Thunder played, and then he was at 50% in the playoffs. And the volume was like, it wasn't Davis Bertans volume, but it was like actual volume. So do you buy into that? Do you think he starts right away for this team? Like, what are just your impressions of him, or what is the team expecting from him going into this year?
I do think he starts, and I do think that the Thunder are expecting him to be kind of their second option, like we talked about earlier. So the more playing time and the more responsibility that he can get, and the earlier in the season that happens, I think that's best for him long term. I think the biggest thing that they're going to be looking forward to him doing, which you kind of touched on, is consistency. So that really great volume of 3-point shooting that happened at the end of the season, there were glimmers and spots of that throughout the regular season, but it was never really consistent where he could be like a reliable knockdown shooter. So I think the biggest thing for him is consistency, and then just size and defense, and being able to protect the rim and things like that, which just comes with getting bigger. He's also super young, but I think he's been working on getting bigger, so hopefully he has some more defensive capabilities this season.
Does he have like more to plumb on offense than like someone who's going to, and this isn't like a bad thing if this is what he is, but it seemed like a lot of his, or most of his opportunities are going to come within the flow of the offense, which I think, when you have Chris Paul on your team, like and Dennis Schroeder and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, that's going to happen. But 70% of his offensive possessions were either spot ups or in transition. Does he have like, do you view him as more of like a plug and play offensive option? Do you see like someone who has more of a floor game, or that they might try and expand his role to generate his own offense? Or has he kind of like already been is that just going to be his niche where he's like playing off of everybody else?
I think that's kind of his niche. I think he's going to be more of a plug and play player, but I don't think that's, like you said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You can't have everyone on the team being someone who creates shots, right? So I think that is his niche, and I think that pairs really well with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like you said. So I think they could be a good combo between the two of them. But yeah, I don't think that he's going to be, a create your own shot kind of player.
But and those guys are just easier to have on the roster in general because they don't dictate how you flesh out the rest of it. Like, they can just fit with everybody else.
Yeah. And I think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just one more thing. I think Darius Bazley is so young, but also so motivated to learn. And I think that one thing that's going to be different for him this season is not having Chris Paul to kind of be that mentor, to kind of be that guy that's on him to, live up to his potential. And so I'm hoping that SGA kind of takes on that role for the Thunder and can really motivate these young guys to play beyond their potential, because I think Chris Paul did a great job of that with Darius Bazley, and obviously with Dort. So that'll be a big part for Darius Bazley this season as well.
Kind of going the complete opposite direction for players that don't feel necessarily long for this roster. The three that stand out with divergent timelines are George Hill, Trevor Ariza, and Al Horford. do you have a sense of like what the end game is going to be for them? Like, are they so transient where you just assume that, probably Hill and Ariza specifically, just the way their contracts work out, that they're going to be gone by the trade deadline, even if it's like a matter of a buyout in the interim, however long with the team? Do you see them getting like actual playing time and, including Horford into that as well?
Yeah, so it's a difficult position for the Thunder because you want to develop your young talent. You want to play those players as much as you can. But at the same time, if you want to get a return on Hill or Ariza or Horford, you have to play them to show a potentially contending team that Al Horford is the missing piece that they need to win a championship. So that's a delicate balance that the Thunder are going to have to figure out how to do that. I kind of think that Hill and Horford will have spots in the starting lineup, but I do not think that they will be there long term. So I think that Hill and Ariza probably get flipped before the deadline. Horford might be a little bit more challenging, but if you can show that he's still a valuable player that a contending team might want, I think it's plausible that he could also be flipped before the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, they're the Thunder like masters of that, apparently, after the talk being that they were going to need to attach something to move Chris Paul before last season, and then, like we mentioned at the top of the podcast, they trade him for actual value. The thing with Horford too is like he was viewed as like a top 20, top 25 player heading into last year, and so you look at his age, sort of the injury problems that he dealt with last season. You don't necessarily want to get into him for the 3 years, and I think he has $68 million guaranteed and $81 million total. At the same time, if he's like playing a ton of center, like, and doesn't have to play alongside like another traditional big for too long, if you're in lineups where Darius Bazley is your 4 and there's just like enough spacing around him, I feel like there's actually a better than advertised chance the Thunder do end up rebooting his value. Not to the point where they're going to get necessarily value for him in return, but where another team might come calling and they're not asking for an asset to come with him.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so. And I think just at the end of the day, like, obviously picks are great, and obviously Sam Presti loves his draft picks, but also just getting that contract off of our books, however we manage to do that. Because right now, I think like the Thunder, if you take out the larger contracts, they've got like 40 million on the books or something ridiculous like that, and like most of that is going towards these bigger players, and they've got like 10 players that only account for like $15 million or something absolutely ridiculous like that. And so I think that's more of the big picture, is keeping those spaces open on the books to re-sign SGA, but also to get a larger name all-star type player when the time comes for that, which is not now in the long term. But we don't want to have Horford's contract on the books when it comes time for that.
Right. He's like when you're looking at even just like expensive salary, though, he's really the only long-term expensive salary they have because of George Hill's non-guarantee next year.
Exactly. It's crazy.
This is they've really cleared the deck there. I'm just like, they're just interesting by virtue of all the options in front of them.
Exactly.
So what's still the biggest concern for this roster, whether you're looking at the current construction, if you don't expect them maybe to shake it up, mid-season before the offseason? Is it oversimplifying it to say like they don't have that clear-cut floor general and maybe they're going to be too reliant on SGA? Is it sort of the limited amount of, I'll say, proven two-way wings, because that could still be, maybe Bazley's more of a big, or maybe Dort just, hits more of his threes this year? Are we worried about Sam Presti drowning in all the first-round picks that he has acquired?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, and that's probably the most concerning thing, is just not knowing what's going to happen. But I think this is going to sound crazy, but I think the roster as currently constructed today, we're still too good. So we need to be less good. And that means, trading Ariza, Horford, Hill, whatever combination of those things. But I think right now this team is still too good for what I would like it to be. And then the other thing that kind of concerns me long term is that, yes, we're clearing the books. Yes, we are, really focusing on a couple of players. But what has happened as a result of that is our whole roster is super young. And so going forward, I think we'll need a player like a Chris Paul type player to come and kind of be the anchor for the team. And I hope that SGA can be that type of person, but I think you really need someone who's a little bit more of a veteran, more experienced in the league, because we are talking about SGA becoming the leader for this team, but also keep in mind, like you said, it's only his third year in the NBA. So he doesn't really have that, I think, presence and leadership that a player like Chris Paul would have. So I'm most concerned about just how young our team is, but I think that will change going forward. And then just not knowing what trades are going to happen and if our team is going to really be bad enough for how bad we need to be.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you, at least when we're looking at the top of the roster. Like, if they weren't to make any moves for the rest of the season, there's a few teams that I would look at and be like, there's a strong chance that OKC is better than them, which I guess would sort of lead me like into this question when maybe even, I know starting lineups are, and I don't even think I had this written down in the outline I sent you, so I apologize, but like starting lineups have become arbitrary, but this might be one of the teams where it's really interesting because of the balance they have to strike between development and then like they do have these veterans on the team that are going to want to play. So what do you think their starting five ends up being at the start of the season?
I think at the start of the season, it's going to be SGA, Dort, Hill, Bazley, and Horford. And I think that lineup will start and end the games. But what's going to happen in the middle is just going to be an absolute disaster. It's a mess of just putting in random players, and they're not random. They're NBA players, but just really weird combinations of really young players and just kind of seeing what works, but also getting them the experience that they need. So that's kind of how I see them kind of towing that line between getting Horford and Hill the minutes that they need, but also getting young players the experience that they need. That's kind of how I think it'll go, but I don't know. It obviously all depends on how the roster changes throughout the season as well.
Is there given the weirdness that's going to happen for the in-between lineups, is there maybe one that you're hoping they just test out that might be on the quirkier side?
I really like Theo Maledon. I think that I guess I'll explain for those of you who are not following the Thunder. He's this guy from France who is described as Tony Parker's protege. And he's trained under Tony Parker. Tony Parker really loves him. He's a pretty talented guard, been playing in France. It was a really good pick for the Thunder in the second round that he was still available. So I think that he could be an exciting piece, and possibly long term, maybe they could recreate kind of the 3-guard lineup that they had versus a 3-4 guard lineup that they had at the end of last season, and instead have Maledon in there instead of Hill. And I think that could be interesting, but it depends. I haven't seen him play yet, so I don't know.
Do you think that they'll go back to, I know they did this intermittently last year, we'll see, and especially because I feel like the backup 5 rotation is pretty up in the air if we don't think that Pokashevsky is going to spend a lot of time with the team. Do we see Baisley at the 5 this year a bunch?
Yeah, I think so. And that's why I'm hoping that he's, gotten bigger, put on some weight, gotten stronger. I think he'll be better in that role that way. But yeah, I do think we see him at center as well as power forward.
I'm an endless lobbyer for small ball lineup, so that's what I want to see from them this season.
It's going to be really small. It's just going to be SGA, Dort, Maledon, Baisley, George Hill. Just that's it.
I will be absolutely here for that. So I feel like this is an unfair question for this team specifically, but what's a realistic win total and Western Conference standings finish for this team? And it was I just, as a background for the listeners, I said to Olivia, you could interpret this however you want, looking at if the roster stays together, if they shake it up, or you could even view it as what are the Thunder going to aim for? What is their ideal finish to the season at this point, given that they're so entrenched in the early stages of this rebuild?
Okay, so this is kind of a long answer. That's okay. So for me personally, I was very much not about tanking and about the rebuild. I understand the necessity of it. I understand why it's strategic and why it works, and why, if done properly, it doesn't necessarily relegate you to 10 years of being terrible. So that's the biggest thing. And I think Sam Presti knows this. So we're a small market team in Oklahoma City. Just the fact that we are tanking this one season has already angered so many fans who just they're casuals. They don't understand the strategicness of tanking, but I don't think that Sam Presti can afford like 10 years of being bad. So what needs to happen is I think they just need to commit full-heartedly to this tank and be as bad as they possibly can. And we're talking like third worst in the league, so they can get their lottery pick, because next season's draft class is phenomenal, way better than this year's draft class. And so I think they should just really commit to it and be awful this season and then work their way back up the next couple of seasons. But I think if they commit to that and they get a lottery pick this season, so maybe like, I don't know, is that like 20 wins? I don't know if that's enough to get you third worst in the NBA. There's some other teams that are also tanking, so we'll have to see exactly how many wins that is, but I think that should be the goal, just because if you're going to tank, you just commit, do it properly. If you halfway, you end up like the Knicks or you end up like Cleveland, and we just can't do that in Oklahoma City, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think 20. So if they got 20 wins this year, that would be a 23 win equivalent. I would say that's right up there. I like that you accounted, the Knicks are just going to be awful. So like they're probably not going to outbad the Knicks. But I feel like they have an opportunity. Maybe Cleveland would be the only other team that I look at and say, unless they're going to play Kevin Love like a ton and not move him, I guess the Pistons could be there. But bottom three feels realistic. And so, but I guess that's like predicated on, we're probably assuming that two of Hill, Horford, and Ariza are just gone by the trade deadline then, right?
Exactly. And that's what needs to happen, in my opinion. There's so many good players available in next year's draft, including Cade Cunningham from Oklahoma State, Evan Mobley from my alma mater, USC. So those are two players that I would love it if the Thunder got them, but they've got to be really bad to get there.
This is a super big question, but you kind of touched on it, but like when you look at it right now, it feels like the Thunder are like, no, they're not aiming to have this be like a 10-year rebuild. And, after next season, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to be extension eligible. So a reinvestment in their own players is coming. Is there a scenario though where the process gets maybe more expedited? Because I feel like they've at least sent the message where the next 2 to 3 years are just not going to be especially pretty. But like, what happens if, Shai, as you mentioned, what if he's too good for them to be so bad this year, where he enters the All-Star conversation? They're sitting on all this draft equity. Maybe there's a star that becomes available. I'm not saying an aging one over the offseason, but is there a scenario in which maybe they look to consolidate some of their equity to accelerate this timeline? Or do you really think it's going to end up staying on the more gradual course?
So I kind of think it's already pretty expedited. I think that 2 to 3 years is not the worst thing. I think that's actually pretty good. But if there was a situation where just like SGA shows out and he's just all-star level SGA, I think what they're more likely to do is, will still be bad this season, obviously, and then take a draft pick next season who's someone who they can win with now, someone who's ready to play now, not someone that they have to invest in like Poku or Darius Bazley. And after that, I just don't see them really packaging all of their future to get another star to play with SGA one season from now. But I think it might mean them packaging more of their assets to, do more in the draft, or packaging those 2027s, the really far away stuff, to get someone decent for SGA. But I don't really see that happening, because I think that Sam Presti's plans are much more long term, and I think that if he sticks with that plan as it is right now, I think the return will be better than one really good season of SGA and someone else.
Is there anything else that I missed about this team? I'm actually surprised at how quickly we went through it all. Maybe I was pushing the pace a little too quickly, but is there something that's undercovered or underrepresented about this team? Any player that we didn't touch on too much that you have strong feelings about? Do you have any Ty Jerome hot takes or something?
Well, I feel like we didn't talk enough about Lu Dort and how important he's going to be to the Thunder. And I almost honestly feel like we can never talk enough about how great Lu Dort is. It's just, I don't know, he's just phenomenal. His whole story from being undrafted to hitting 7 threes in a game 7 is just chef's kiss. But I think that, yes, Bazley is really important, and he'll probably be the second option. But I think that Lu Dort, he's going to be coming up. He's coming for that Defensive Player of the Year. I think he could be like Andre Robertson, except better at shooting, but just like right there in that depoy conversation. And so that's what I hope for Lu Dort this season, is that even if we as a team aren't that great, that he can really show off his defense. I don't want to be in a position that where we're relying on Lu Dort to hit his threes, because that's risky.
I have no emotional investment in the Thunder, and that was stressful for me watching that. The 6 games that he averaged like 8.3 3-point attempts per game over the final 6 games of that series, and like just the wild swings where he had an 0 of 9 night, but he had the 6 of 12 night, and then it's like he was hitting them at the beginning. I can't, if this was like game 2, maybe he was hitting them at the beginning but not at the end or whatever it was. So like that was stressful for me. So I can only imagine like what it's like for a Thunder fan having to watch those moments.
Yeah, it was stressful but also fun. And this season I'm totally fine if Lu Dort wants to jack up threes. That's okay. But as long as he's still, making those defensive steps and growing in that, because he really does have the potential to be one of the best defenders in the league. And I know that there are probably people that are listening to this right now that don't watch the Thunder that are like, what is this girl talking about? She's a homer. But I swear to you, it is true. He has, he's really great defensive instincts and can really guard the best player on any team, in my opinion. And so I think that he's going to be someone to watch this season as well.
Yeah, he's just so strong. I also don't think I acknowledged how young he was. Like he's 21 right now. He'll turn 22 in April. Like that's still pretty young. What do you envision for him on offense though? Like I feel, it's like the conversation with Ben Simmons. Like imagine how good he could be if he could shoot. And it's like, well, that's not really a small thing that we can just imagine. So what is his what are other things he can do on offense? Is this is he strong enough to where maybe you use him as just a smaller screener and he's diving towards the basket? Do you like his finishing at the rim? Do you see someone who's going to be able to attack closeouts when they're giving him just a ton of space where he can get into the lane?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that last season, his discrepancy between offense and defense really showed, partly because there are just so many other people that were on the team last year that were better shooters than he was. So there's just other options. But now with this Thunder team as constructed, I feel like he could take on a larger offensive role. But to me, and they didn't really use him this way last season, I think that means finishing around the rim. And I think that's probably the best place for him. Like you said, he's a big guy. He's not very tall, but he's wide, like a brick wall. And I think that could be, he could use that to his advantage, kind of like a Russell Westbrook or someone who just kind of bullies their way to the rim.
Well, Olivia, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and doing a deep dive into the Thunder with me. If you guys are not following Olivia on Twitter, remedy that immediately. She's at Olivia Panchal. That's at OLIVIA PANCHAL. She is a senior writer and co-host of the Crossbolts podcast. Excuse me, I can't talk today, for Daily Thunder. So again, just follow her on Twitter. And once more, Olivia, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.